Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku got caught between Hulk and One for All. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The air in the unforeseen simulation joint 2.0 hummed with a manufactured tension. Unlike its ill-fated predecessor, this facility was a marvel of modern engineering and paranoia. Reinforced walls, redundant power systems, and a dozen layers of security protocols overseen directly by Niza himself. Today, it was a playground for heroes in training. Team Alpha, what's your status? Over. Tenya Ida's voice, crisp and formal even when filtered through a comms unit, crackled in Izuku Midoriya's ear. We've reached the target building, Ida. Izuku replied, his own voice a low murmur. He was crouched behind a slab of faux concrete, peering around its edge. A vibrant green lightning of One for All, full cowling danced across his skin, a familiar and comforting pressure. At 45%, the power was no longer a self-destructive calamity but an extension of his will. It felt like a song thrumming just beneath his skin, a chorus of 8 voices harmonizing with his own. Handsome, are the sensors active? A burst of static was his answer, followed by, my babies are purring like cybernetic kittens, Midoriya. I've got thermal, seismic, and ooh, is that a new type of microwave scanner? All, pinpointing 3 heat signatures on the 3rd floor. They're the dummy hostages. Predictable, Izuku smiled. Working with Mei Hatsum was always an exercise in controlled chaos. Her enthusiasm was a force of nature, matched only by the explosive potential of her inventions. Their objective was simple: infiltrate the building, neutralize the mock villain robots guarding the area, and retrieve the 3 high-tech dummies representing captured civilians. A classic rescue and recovery op, designed to test their synergy with the support course. Alright, Uraraka, what's the plan? Izuku asked, shifting his gaze to his teammate beside him. Ochako Uraraka was looking up, her brow furrowed in concentration. The west face of the building is a sheer wall. No windows on the first 2 floors. I can make myself and one other person float up, but it's risky. We'd be exposed. The direct approach is a tactical fallacy. Ida's voice interjected from his position 100 meters back, where he was serving as their command and potential rapid response unit. The main entrance is a bottleneck designed to be a kill zone, which is why we won't use it, Izuku said, his analytical mind kicking into gear. He pointed. Hatsum, your wire arrows. Can they support my weight if I use them to scale the building? Pfft. My high-tension wire arrows could support All Might in his prime after a buffet lunch, she declared proudly. They'll anchor into that composite material like they were born there. What's your angle, Green Bean? Uraraka, you make the hostages light. Ida, when we give the signal, you do a reciprocal burst to the ground floor entrance, and make as much noise as possible. Draw the bots down. While they're distracted, I'll go up the side, and Uraraka, you float up behind me. We converge on the 3rd floor from 2 directions. Clean and efficient. It was a solid plan, a testament to how far they had come. The old, panicking Izuku would have charged in headfirst. This version, tempered by battles and honed by tireless training, was a budding strategist. An excellent stratagem, Midoriya. Acknowledged. Ida confirmed. Ready when you are, Deku. Uraraka gave him a determined grin, her fingertips glowing with faint pink energy. With a nod, Izuku broke from cover. He moved like a blur of green light, his feet barely touching the ground. He fired 2 of Hatsum's grapple arrows into the wall, the lines pulling taut. The ascent was a symphony of controlled power, his augmented muscles pulling him up the wall in powerful, rhythmic bursts. Below, a cacophony erupted as Ida's engines roared to life, a calculated distraction. Everything was going perfectly. It was just another day at UA, thousands of miles, and a barrier far more profound than distance. Away, the air tasted of ozone and burning metal. New York City was screaming. The sky, a grim slate gray, was scarred by the repulsor trails of Iron Man and the streaking energy bolts of his enemies. Banner, status report. I've got civilians pinned down in the subway entrance on 42nd and Lex. Captain America's voice, strained but resolute, cut through the din in Bruce Banner's earpiece. I see them, Cap. Bruce replied, his hands flying across a tablet. He was huddled behind the wreckage of a city bus, the chassis groaning under the impact of another stray blast. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. Their heat signatures are clear, but the main entrance is blocked by a collapsing facade. Stark, can you clear the debris? A little busy preventing a fleet of chrome-plated psychos from turning Grand Central into a modern art installation, Bruce. Tony Stark's voice was a tinny burst of sarcasm and repulsor fire. Give me 90 seconds, 90 seconds. An eternity. Bruce could hear the terrified sobs of a child, a high-pitched wail that sliced through the roar of battle and straight into his soul. His hands trembled not from fear, but from a rage that was always simmering, always waiting. It was a green, ugly thing, a co-tenant in his own body that paid its rent in destruction. Calm down, Bruce. You're no good to them as the other guy. Not here. Not with this many people. Another Ultron sentry, a sleek silver automaton with glowing red eyes, landed 20 feet away. It swiveled its head, its optical sensors locking onto the bus. Bruce's blood ran cold. I've got a bogey moving on my position, he said, his voice dangerously low. Hold on, Banner! Cap grunted. A sickening crunch followed, and Bruce knew the sentinel that had been threatening Steve was no more. I'm on my way, but he wasn't fast enough. The sentry raised its arm, its palm glowing with malevolent red energy. There was no time. The civilians in the subway, the people he was trying to coordinate a rescue for, were just beyond that sentry. His frustration, his feeling of utter helplessness, boiled over. The tablet in his hands cracked under the pressure of his grip. His heart rate monitor, a state-of-the-art StarkTech watch, began to beep, a frantic, rising tempo. 110 BPM, 125 BPM, 140 BPM. No. Not now. Stay in control, the sentry fired. Bruce threw himself to the side, the world dissolving into a roar of heat and concussive force. He was thrown against the bus's frame, his head smacking hard against the steel. Pain flared, but it was quickly being consumed by something else. Something hot, green, and furious. His skin began to prickle. The drumbeat in his chest was becoming a deafening roar. I have visual on the bots, Izuku whispered, peering through a third-floor window he just silently pried open. 3 of them. Standard-issue training models. They're moving towards the stairwell. Ida's distraction is working. I'm in position on the north side. Uraraka's voice came through, slightly breathless from her ascent. Ready to make my babies floaty, Hatsum added unhelpfully but with spirit. On my mark, Izuku said, channeling one for all through his legs. He was about to give the signal when a flicker in the corner of his eye caught his attention. Down in the central plaza where they had started, a man had appeared. He hadn't been there a second ago. He wore a bizarre, patchwork suit of dark leather and shimmering metal plates that seemed to glitch. Like a bad video feed, his edges would pixelate and stutter for a moment before resolving. Aizawa-sensei, Izuku said into his comm, his voice suddenly sharp with alarm. We have an unauthorized individual in the training ground. Central Plaza. He's not a student or a robot. A pause, then Aizawa's tired, serious voice. I see him. All students, fall back to designated safe zones. This is no longer a drill. I repeat, this is no longer a drill. The man, whom the world would later know as Rift Rider, looked around the expansive facility with a hungry, desperate glint in his eyes. His real name was Kaito Tanaka, a failed inventor whose own quirk, the ability to punch small, temporary holes in space, was too unstable and self-damaging for heroics or conventional applications. He'd watched UA's support corps garner fame and funding, and a bitter jealousy had festered into a criminal plan. He was here to steal Mei Hatsum's schematics and prototypes. He was here to take what he felt he was owed. He raised a hand, and the air in front of him tore open with a sound like grinding glass. It wasn't a portal, not like Kuroji's. It was a wound in reality, a jagged, bleeding tear about the size of a doorway, showing a distorted, fish-eye view of a corridor a few hundred feet away. He stepped through, his body glitching violently as he passed the threshold, and appeared next to the support course's equipment staging area. He can teleport, Izuku reported, his mind racing. Aizawa-sensei, he's heading for the support gear. I'm on it, Aizawa replied. From his vantage point, Izuku saw his teacher leap into action, his capture weapon lashing out. But Rift Rider was slippery. He'd open a tiny rift just big enough for the weapon to pass through, causing it to wrap around a distant pillar. He was a coward, not a fighter, using his quirk purely to evade. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the comms, laced with manic glee. Ooh! A reality warper! My babies could have so much fun with a quirk like that! Anti-phase boots! Dimensional stabilizers! The possibilities are endless. Hatsum, stay put! Izuku ordered, but it was too late. He saw her, a pink blur, rocketing down from her perch using a jetpack that was clearly still in its beta phase. May no! Power Loader's panicked voice shouted over the faculty channel. Rift Rider saw her coming. He saw the gleam of advanced tech and his eyes widened. He raised a hand not at Hatsum, but at a massive lighting rig above her. He tore a small rift at the rig's anchor point and another one directly above her. The multi-ton rig detached and simply appeared in the air over her head, plummeting down. Time seemed to slow down for Izuku. Uraraka screamed his name. Aizawa's eyes widened, his erasure useless against gravity. Hatsum, caught mid-flight, looked up in surprise horror. There was no choice. There was never a choice. He pushed off the wall, shattering the window. He didn't dial down the power, he cranked it up. The green lightning around him intensified, arcing and snapping. One for all, full cowling. 100%! The power was a supernova inside him. A glorious, agonizing fire that threatened to vaporize his bones. He had only ever used this level for single, desperate strikes. To move with it was to invite obliteration. But he had to. He crossed the distance in a single, reality-bending leap. He was a green comet, the air screaming around him. He appeared beneath the falling rig an instant before it would have crushed Hatsum, his arms raised. The impact was cataclysmic. His arms screamed, the bones fracturing under the immense weight, but the raw power of One for All held. He roared, a sound of pure effort and pain, and threw the massive structure aside. It crashed into the side of a building simulator, crumpling steel and concrete. He landed in a crouch, his arms already broken and useless, sending spider webs of cracks through the ground. The backlash was immediate and excruciating. Red-hot agony shot up his limbs. But he wasn't done. Rift Rider was staring, his mouth agape at the display of raw power. He was frozen in a moment of sheer terror. It was the opening Izuku needed. Ignoring the blinding pain, he kicked off the ground, channeling that same 100% into a single leg for a Delaware smash. He flew at the villain, his hand balled into a fist, ready to deliver a flick that would end the fight. It's over! He yelled, his voice raw. Rift Rider, backed into a corner, his eyes wild with a cornered animal's fear, did the only thing he could. He pushed his quirk beyond its limits. Beyond sense. Beyond sanity. His whole body began to glitch and tear. Blood streamed from his nose and eyes. Get away from me! He shrieked, slamming his palms together. He wasn't trying to open a hole to another place in the USJ. He was pushing outward, in every direction, trying to tear a hole in everything. He was trying to rip a hole in the very fabric of dimensions. 160 BPM. 180 BPM. The world swam back into focus for Bruce Banner. The pain in his head was a dull throb, completely overshadowed by the inferno of rage building in his chest. The Ultron sentry was turning, its red eyes scanning for him. He could feel his muscles thickening, coiling with a power that wasn't human. His shirt was suddenly, unbearably tight across his shoulders. Stop. 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 His watch screamed, a solid, high-pitched tone. 200 BPM, the breaking point. No! He roared, but the voice was already changing, deepening into a guttural snarl that was not his own. His vision blurred, tinged with a sickly, furious green. The sounds of the city, the pleas of the civilians, Stark's witty retorts, they all faded, replaced by a single, overwhelming imperative. Smash! At that exact moment, the air in front of him shimmered. It tore. It wasn't a portal. It was a wound. A jagged, bleeding tear in the air that crackled with an energy he had never seen before, a chaotic storm of rainbow light and black static. It smelled of ozone and something ancient, something that felt like potential. Through the rift, for a single, impossible instant, he saw a boy. A boy with wild green hair, a face contorted in pain and determination, surrounded by a corona of green lightning. A boy hurtling forward, ready to strike. The Hulk's emergence was a psychic and physical detonation. A wave of pure, undiluted rage, the psychic manifestation of his pain and power, surged outward. Simultaneously, a flood of raw gamma radiation, the very energy that had created him, poured from his transforming body. It all went straight into the rift. From Izuku's perspective, the world ended. One moment, he was about to deliver a fight-ending flick. The next, the space in front of the villain shattered. A hole ripped open, not a neat circle, but a violent, angry fissure in reality. It didn't show another part of the training ground. It showed a vision of hell, a burning city under a gray sky. And from that hole, a wave of energy unlike anything he had ever felt slammed into him. It wasn't just heat. It was an emotion. It was pure, undiluted, bottomless rage. It was a psychic tidal wave that crashed against the carefully constructed dam of his mind. The serene mindscape where the vestiges of One for All resided was instantly engulfed. He felt Nana Shimura's shocked gasp, Yoichi's cry of alarm, the silent panic of the others as this alien consciousness, this roaring green leviathan of pure fury, invaded their sanctuary. The voices of his predecessors, the comforting chorus that had guided him, were snuffed out, replaced by a single, booming, monosyllabic roar that echoed in the deepest parts of his soul. Hulk! Simultaneously, a physical force, a torrent of radioactive green energy, washed over him. It didn't feel like an attack. It felt like an infusion. It flooded into his cells, into his very DNA, and found a home. It found the crackling, stockpiled energy of One for All and it latched on, merging, twisting, corrupting. His Delaware smash, the 100% flick he was about to unleash, was still building in his hand. The immense, stockpiled kinetic energy of One for All met the incoming wave of gamma radiation and psychic rage. It was like throwing a match into a warehouse full of dynamite. For everyone outside the epicenter, time seemed to stop. All Might, in his skeletal form on the observation deck, felt it first. It wasn't just power. He had felt power before. This was something else. A fusion of something sacred, his own legacy, and something utterly profane and alien. A spike of raw, world-breaking energy that made the All for One of old seem like a flickering candle. He coughed up blood, his hand flying to his chest as if he could physically feel the violation of his quirk. Bakugo, who had been blasting his way towards the commotion, was knocked off his feet. He looked up, his crimson eyes wide with something he hadn't truly felt since he was a child. Primal fear. The sheer wrongness of the energy in the air was suffocating. It was wilder than his explosions, more powerful than All Might, and it was centered on one person. Deku. Aizawa, his eyes wide, activated his quirk on instinct. He felt it catch on, something. The green lightning of One for All around Midoriya flickered and died. But the other energy, the raw, toxic green tide, didn't even flinch. It wasn't a quirk. His power was useless. The last thing Izuku Midoriya knew was a sensation of being torn apart and remade atom by atom. He felt his bones, already broken, shattering into dust and then reforming, thicker, denser. He felt his muscles tear and then weave back together, stronger and larger than before. He felt the two immense powers warring within him, the selfless, sacrificial will of One for All screaming to save, and the selfish, primal will of this new thing roaring to smash. Then, there was only light. A blinding flash of emerald and rainbow light erupted from his body. It was not the heroic green of full cowling. It was a sick, virulent, gamma green. The light expanded in a perfect sphere, silent for a millisecond before the sound caught up. A shockwave of pure, untethered power detonated outwards. It didn't just push, it annihilated. The ground beneath Izuku was vaporized. The villain, Rift Rider, caught at point-blank range, simply ceased to exist, his unstable quirk collapsing in on itself and erasing him from reality. The shockwave tore through the USJ 2.0, shredding the building's simulators into shrapnel, shattering every window, and throwing everyone, students, teachers, heroes, to the ground. The massive dome itself groaned, metal struts twisting and glass panels bursting under the strain. The light and sound vanished as quickly as they had appeared, plunging the vast space into an eerie, sudden silence, broken only by the groan of stressed metal and the distant sirens that had just begun to scream. A thick cloud of dust and smoke obscured the center of the plaza. Slowly it began to settle, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Where Izuku Midoriya had been standing, there was now a crater. It was 50 meters wide, glassy and smooth at the center, as if the very earth had been melted and fused. And in the very middle of that crater, lying amidst the cracked and smoking ground, was the boy. He was unconscious, his hero costume shredded and burned away in places. He looked different. His frame, while still lean, seemed denser, broader across the shoulders and chest. But the most terrifying detail was his skin. Across his arms, his chest, and creeping up his neck, his veins were no longer blue. They were a lurid, sickly green. They weren't just visible. They were glowing, pulsing with a slow, rhythmic, and utterly monstrous light, like conduits for a poison that was now irrevocably part of him. The faint, silent hum of gamma radiation saturated the air around him, a deadly and alien lullaby. Izuku Midoriya had been caught in a war between two worlds, between two impossible powers. And in the silent, smoking crater, a new, terrible thing had just been born. The first sound to pierce the veil of chaos was the sterile, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor. It was a sound of life, of stability, a stark and unwelcome contrast to the apocalyptic devastation just outside. The air in UA's main infirmary was thick with the scent of antiseptic and ozone, a combination that spoke of medical crisis and unnatural energies. Izuku Midoriya lay on a reinforced medical bed in the central quarantine chamber, a room usually reserved for victims of exotic quirk accidents. He was a still point in a storm of frantic activity. Wires snaked from his body to a bank of monitors, their screens displaying a chaotic symphony of data that made a mockery of medical science. Recovery girl, Chio Shizenji, stood before the main console, her usually gentle face etched with a deep, weary frustration. Her hands, typically so steady, trembled slightly as she adjusted a sensor on Izuku's temple. For 50 years, she had been the foremost authority on quirk-related physiology. She had seen men who could turn their bones to blades, women who could secrete acid, and children whose bodies were living portals to other dimensions. She had never seen anything like this. His heart rate is fluctuating between 40 beats per minute and 210. She murmured, more to herself than to the grim figure standing behind her. It's completely untethered from any external stimuli. His cellular regeneration it's beyond anything my quirk can induce. It's exponential. On a secondary screen, a 3D model of Izuku's skeletal structure was displayed. Areas of red highlighted fractures he had sustained during the incident. His arms, shattered from catching the lighting rig. His legs, stressed to the breaking point from his 100% dash. But even as they watched, the red flickered and faded to green. The comminuted fractures in his radius and ulna, they've already healed, she said, her voice laced with disbelief. Not just healed. The bone is remodeling itself. The density has increased by 12% in the last hour alone. His muscle mass is following suit. It's like his body is actively reinforcing itself against a threat that's already passed, or a threat that was still there, locked inside him. Standing vigil by the reinforced glass of the chamber was Tashinori Yagi, a gaunt shadow of the hero he once was. He looked at the boy on the bed, and the guilt was a physical thing, a crushing weight on his already frail chest. He could feel it, a ghost of a sensation from a power that was no longer his. One for all, the sacred torch he had passed to this bright, determined boy, felt violated, tainted. He could sense its familiar, warm glow, but it was now trapped, suffocated by something cold, alien, and overwhelmingly powerful. What have I done? The thought was a familiar, venomous refrain in his mind. I gave him a god's power, and he used it like a saint. But in doing so, I made him a beacon. A beacon for what? What abyss did we gaze into? What gazed back? He had felt the energy spike from the observation deck. It wasn't just a familiar, heroic crescendo of one for all reaching its peak. It was a second wave, a psychic and energetic tsunami that had nothing to do with quirks. It felt ancient, primal, and steeped in a rage so pure it was almost a physical force. It had latched onto one for all, not as a parasite, but as a predator performing a hostile merger. He had not passed on a torch, he had fed his son to a furnace. The door to the observation room hissed open, and Shota Aizawa entered, his face as grim and unreadable as ever. His arm was in a sling, a souvenir from being swatted aside by the initial shockwave. He didn't look at the monitors. He looked at Tashinori, and then at the boy in the chamber. Any change? Aizawa's voice was a low rasp, devoid of its usual tired apathy. It was sharp, focused. He is healing at an impossible rate, Tashinori answered, his voice hollow. Chio-san says his quirk factor is unreadable. A storm of static. It's not static, Recovery Girl corrected, turning from her console. It's a signal so powerful it's overloading every scanner we have. It's like trying to measure a puddle during a hurricane, and there are two distinct signatures now, fused together. One is Midoriya's, amplified 1,000 times. The other, it's not from any quirk I have on file. Its energy profile is completely alien. The radiation it's emitting is faint, but it's consistent with high-level gamma particles. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. I've already given the order. The infirmary's primary wing is under full quarantine. No one in or out without my express permission. I have Hound Dog and a security team stationed at every entrance. Until we know what we're dealing with, Midoriya is to be considered a Class S bioenergetic threat. Tashinori flinched as if struck. He is a boy, Aizawa. My student. Your student. He is my student. Aizawa conceded, his voice dangerously soft. Which is why I am taking every precaution to ensure that if he wakes up, he doesn't inadvertently level the school. Right now, he is a patient and a potential piece of ordnance. I will treat him as both until I can be certain which one he is. The cold pragmatism was a splash of icy water, and Tashinori knew he was right. The sheer, untamed power they had witnessed was beyond anything a hero, or a villain, should be able to wield. It was the power to break continents. And it was sleeping inside a 17-year-old boy who cried during sad movies. As if summoned by the gravity of the situation, the door hissed open again. Principal Niza entered, his small, furry form a bizarre sight amidst the high-tech medical equipment. He hopped onto a stool, his black eyes reflecting the frantic readouts on the screens. Fascinating, he chirped, his tone utterly at odds with the tension in the room. Two distinct energy sources, you say? One, the stockpiling quirk we are all familiar with, and another of an unknown, possibly extradimensional origin. And they have fused at a biological and energetic level within a human host. The ramifications are simply staggering. Nizu, this isn't one of your thought experiments, Aizawa warned. Isn't it? The principal countered, his whiskers twitching. It is the most profound and dangerous thought experiment imaginable, and it has come to life in one of our children. Power Loader and the support course are already analyzing the energy residue from the crater. I have sent a request to Island. David Shield's expertise in energy fields is unparalleled. We need data. We need to understand what is happening inside young Midoriya, or we will be utterly unprepared for the consequences. He turned his gaze from the screens to the boy. For now, Aizawa's quarantine stands. All Might, you must prepare yourself. You are the only one who has any idea of the nature of One for All. You may be our only hope of reaching him. The implication was clear. Reaching him, or stopping him. Outside the sealed blast doors of the infirmary wing, the mood was far from analytical. It was a thick soup of fear and confusion. Class 1A was gathered, a huddled mass of brightly colored costumes and worried faces. They had been shepherded here after the blast, checked for injuries, and then told to wait. The silence from the faculty was deafening. What was that? Kirishima asked for the 10th time, running a hand through his spiked red hair. That energy, it wasn't just Midoriya, was it? It felt angry. It was terrifying. Kaminari whispered, leaning against the wall, his usual energetic spark completely extinguished. I thought the gnome at the USJ was scary, but this was on another level. Tenya Ida stood ramrod straight, chopping the air with his hand, but his movements were jerky, his usual precision lost to anxiety. We must remain calm. The UA faculty has the situation under control. We must trust in their judgment and await their official report. How can we be calm, Ida? Ochako Uraraka's voice trembled. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and fixed on the blast doors as if she could see through them. Deku was at the center of that. He saved Hatsum, and then, that light. Is he okay? Why won't they tell us anything? She looked at Ida, her best friend, her anchor in moments of crisis, but he had no answers. He could only offer a stiff, uncertain nod. The fear was contagious, a cold dread that settled over all of them. They had faced villains, death, and destruction. But this was different. This came from one of their own. It was a power so immense it defied their understanding of what a quirk could be. A little ways down the hall, leaning against the opposite wall in a self-imposed isolation, was Katsuki Bakugo. He was uncharacteristically silent, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his shoulders hunched. He wasn't looking at the others. He was staring at his own hands, his palms still tingling with the memory of the sheer atmospheric pressure of the event. He wasn't just scared. He was profoundly, fundamentally disturbed. All his life, power had a shape, a form he could understand. His explosions. All Might's punches. Endeavor's fire. They were all things you could measure, things you could eventually aspire to overcome. He had watched Deku's power grow from a self-shattering liability into something genuinely formidable, something that finally made him a true rival. But what he had felt from that crater, it had no shape. It was chaos. It was infinity. It was the difference between a firecracker and the sun. It wasn't just the strength that had terrified him, it was the emotion behind it. He had felt it on his skin, in the air, in his bones, a tsunami of incandescent rage that made his own explosive temper feel like a child's tantrum. And it had come from Deku. That damn nerd, Bakugo thought, his knuckles white in his pockets. He's always been a self-destructive idiot, breaking his bones for other people. But this is different. He didn't just break himself, he broke something else. Something in the world. For the first time since they were children, he wasn't thinking about how to surpass Deku. He was wondering if the Deku he knew still existed at all. The boy who had chased after him, the determined crybaby, the infuriating hero wannabe. Had he been erased by that tidal wave of green fury? A cold knot of dread tightened in his stomach. He hated the feeling. It was worse than anger. It was helplessness. In a realm beyond the physical, in the psychic nexus of One for All, the storm raged. The world within Izuku's mind was no longer the serene, ethereal space of chairs and silent contemplation. It was a maelstrom. The sky, once a shifting nebula of blues and purples, was now a roiling, boiling canopy of toxic green clouds, lit from within by constant, silent flashes of gamma lightning. A howling wind, a psychic gale of pure rage tore through the landscape, a soundless scream that vibrated through the very essence of the vestiges. They were scattered, thrown into chaos. The 8 previous users of One for All were no longer seated in their calm circle. They were anchors in a hurricane, their spiritual forms flickering like dying flames against the overwhelming tempest. What is this? What is this presence? The voice of Daigoro Banjo, the 5th user, was a frantic whisper lost in the gale. His own quirk, Black Whip, manifested as tendrils of dark energy trying to hold their sanctuary together, but they were being shredded by the green energy. It's not a quirk. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, stated, his form more stable than the others, a point of faint, determined light. He stood, his gaze fixed on the epicenter of the storm. It's a consciousness, raw, primal, and in so much pain. Nana Shimura floated beside him, her expression one of profound horror and sorrow. She could feel Izuku, her sweet, heroic successor, somewhere deep beneath the storm, his consciousness small and fragile, like a drowning man in a furious ocean. But she couldn't reach him. Every attempt she made to send her comfort, her strength, her guidance, was instantly devoured by the roaring green chaos. It's invading everything, she said, her voice trembling. It's merging with the core of One for All. It feels our will, our desire to save, and it twists it. It sees it as a threat. In the heart of the mindscape, where the core of the stockpiled power resided, a new sun was being born. It was a sphere of roiling, furious green energy, pulsing in time with the chaotic heartbeat they could all feel. And from it, a single, overwhelming concept emanated, not in words, but in pure, unfiltered emotion that crashed over them again and again. It was the psychic roar of a caged beast. A beast of unimaginable power, born of trauma and radiation, whose entire existence was defined by a singular, deafening imperative: rage. Smash. Hurt. The vestiges could only watch in terror as this new, monstrous consciousness began to assert its dominion over the world they had built, over the legacy they had protected. The 8th user had brought them together, but the 9th had brought a monster to their door. A monster that was now becoming one with him. 48 hours passed. 2 days of silence from the quarantine chamber. 2 days of frantic research, hushed meetings, and growing fear. Inside the chamber, Izuku's metamorphosis continued. The green veins had become less lurid, sinking slightly beneath the skin, but they were still there, a permanent, toxic tattoo. His body had stabilized, but he was noticeably bigger. The lean, wiry frame of a runner had been replaced by the denser, more powerful build of a gymnast or a fighter, his weight having increased by a solid 20 pounds of pure, unnaturally dense muscle. Toshinori had not left his post. He sat in a chair beside the observation window, a blanket draped over his skeletal shoulders, looking ancient and defeated. Aizawa came and went, managing the school, which was now in a state of high alert, while also monitoring the situation. The students had been sent back to their dorms, under strict orders not to discuss the incident with anyone. Yui was in lockdown, the official story: catastrophic support equipment malfunction. No one believed it. Uraraka and Ida had been granted a single, 5-minute visit, standing where Toshinori now sat. They had spoken to Izuku's unconscious form, their voices choked with emotion, pleading with him to wake up, to be okay. They left with tears in their eyes, the sight of his altered form and the humming energy in the room leaving them more scared than when they had arrived. On the morning of the 3rd day, something changed. A small alarm on Recovery Girl's console began to chime. It wasn't the frantic warning of a system failure, but a steady, rhythmic beep. "His brainwave activity is normalizing," she announced, her voice sharp, drawing Toshinori and a freshly arrived Aizawa to the console. "The chaotic signals are coalescing. It's like 2 conflicting radio stations are finally tuning to the same frequency." The monitors showing his vitals began to stabilize. His heart rate settled at a steady 90 beats per minute, high for a resting teenager, but unnervingly constant. The energy output, while still immense, was no longer fluctuating wildly. It was humming, a low, powerful thrum of contained energy, like a nuclear reactor brought to a stable operating temperature. Toshinori leaned forward, his bony hands gripping the console. Hope, a feeling he had thought extinguished, flickered painfully in his chest. "Is he waking up?" "It's possible," Chio said cautiously. "All signs point to his body having acclimated. It has found a new equilibrium." Aizawa placed a hand on the intercom connecting to the security teams outside. "All units be ready. Status changed to yellow alert." Inside the chamber, the boy on the bed stirred. It was a small movement, just the twitch of a finger on his right hand. But in the silent, tense room, it was a thunderclap. Toshinori's breath hitched. "Izuku, my boy," he whispered, his voice cracking. Another twitch. His left hand clenched, just for a second, into a fist. The green veins on his arm pulsed, a single, bright flare of emerald light that made the sensors whine. Then, his eyelids fluttered. Aizawa's hand tightened on the intercom button. Toshinori took an involuntary step towards the glass, his heart pounding against his ribs. Slowly, agonizingly, Izuku Midoriya's eyes snapped open. There was no confusion in them. No grogginess from a long slumber. There was only focus. A cold, sharp, predatory focus. And they were not his own. The gentle, expressive green eyes that had held so much kindness, so much determination, so much empathy, were gone. In their place were 2 burning orbs of pure, brilliant, furious light. It was the color of gamma radiation, the color of the storm in his mind, the color of a monster. They glowed with an intensity that was not human, fixing on the one-way glass of the observation room as if they could see right through it, right into the souls of the men watching him. Izuku Midoriya was awake. But it was not Izuku Midoriya who was looking out. The silence in the observation room was a fragile, crystalline thing. It was the silence of held breaths, of hearts that had forgotten how to beat. Through the reinforced polyglass, the three men and the principal watched the impossible. The boy on the bed was awake, but the person looking out was a stranger. Those eyes. They were the color of poison, of deep-sea bioluminescence, of a radiation warning symbol brought to terrible life. They glowed with a cold, internal fire, scanning the room with an unnerving, predatory stillness. There was no flicker of recognition, no sign of the gentle, empathetic soul they knew was trapped somewhere inside. There was only the calm, assessing gaze of a caged animal that was realizing the bars were made of paper. Red alert! Aizawa's voice was a low, urgent rasp into his comms unit. All faculty, code red. The asset is awake and hostile. I repeat, awake and hostile. Evacuate the wing. Seal the sector. Now. His voice didn't betray a hint of panic, but Toshinori could see the muscle jumping in his jaw. Aizawa was a man who planned for every contingency, but the contingency for a god-level threat waking up in their infirmary was something that existed only in theoretical paperwork. Now, it was horrifyingly real. His energy signature is stable, Nizu observed, his beady eyes wide with a terrifying blend of academic fascination and stark dread. It's not spiking. It's idling, like a massive engine waiting for the signal to engage. Chio! Toshinori's voice was a choked whisper. Can you sedate him? Remotely? Recovery Girl was already shaking her head, her face ashen. The tranquilizers in the 4-drip are maxed out. They're being metabolized and rendered inert the moment they enter his bloodstream. His body is treating them like a minor infection. It's actively fighting off sedation. The figure on the bed, this thing wearing Izuku Midoriya's face, slowly, deliberately sat up. The movement was fluid, powerful, devoid of any weakness from his 3-day coma. The thin medical gown strained against a physique that was now undeniably different. The boy who had been admitted was a lean athlete. The being that sat there now was a compact weapon, every muscle fiber coiled with an unnatural density. He tilted his head, and the sickening green glow of his eyes seemed to intensify, as if he could hear their frantic, whispered conversation through the glass. A low growl, like the sound of grinding stones, rumbled in his chest. It was a sound that vibrated through the floor, a resonant frequency of pure menace. It was then that the fragile silence was not just broken, but shattered. From down the hallway, outside the sealed blast doors of the quarantine zone, came a sudden, piercing clatter. The sound of a metal tray laden with medical instruments, hitting the tiled floor. It was followed by a startled yelp and a nervous apology. A junior nurse, young and inexperienced, had been making her rounds. She was late, flustered, and had misinterpreted the initial status yellow alert as a precautionary measure for a new piece of equipment. She hadn't received Aizawa's code red order yet. Her name was Hana Ito, and her only crime was clumsiness. In the quarantine chamber, the creature's head snapped towards the direction of the sound. The reaction was instantaneous and absolute. The low growl erupted into a full-throated snarl. The idling engine roared to life. The calm, predatory assessment vanished, replaced by a singular, explosive imperative: a perceived threat must be eliminated. No! Toshinori yelled, slamming a fist against the glass, a useless, desperate gesture. The being on the bed let out a scream. It was a sound of pure agony and fury, a horrific duet of two voices tearing each other apart. One was the high, desperate shriek of Izuku Midoriya, a voice of pain and terror. The other was a deep, guttural, inhuman roar that drowned it out, a sound of earth-shattering rage. The transformation was not a controlled explosion of power like full cowling. It was a biological violation. The sound of bones breaking and resetting echoed in the chamber, a rapid-fire series of wet, percussive cracks. His body, already enhanced, began to forcibly expand. His shoulders broadened, his limbs thickened, his muscles swelled with a grotesque, terrifying speed. The medical gown, already tight, ripped apart with the sound of tearing canvas. His skin, already tattooed with green veins, began to take on the same sickly green hue all over, spreading like a monstrous, time-lapse bruise until it consumed him entirely. The veins themselves bulged, glowing with a brilliant, toxic light, as if his circulatory system was now pumping pure gamma energy. He grew. Not to the skyscraping size of Gigantomachia, but he swelled from a compact fighter into a solid, brutish behemoth of green muscle and rage, easily clearing 7 feet tall. His face, once soft and boyish, twisted and coarsened. The freckles vanished, subsumed by the green tide. His features remained recognizably Izuku's, but they were a cruel parody, a funhouse mirror reflection distorted by monstrous power and unending fury. He was the Deku Hulk, a living embodiment of a hero's worst nightmare. The reinforced restraints bolted to the bed frame, designed to hold the rampaging Nomu, snapped like rotten thread. He stood, his massive, bare feet cracking the specialized flooring, and he turned his glowing green eyes not to the observation window, but to the solid, reinforced wall in the direction of the noise. That wall was the cage. The noise was the threat. He had to get out. He had to smash it. He raised a fist the size of a small ham and, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the building, he punched. There was no finesse, no technique. No St. Louis smash or Detroit smash. It was just a single, blunt force application of impossible power. The wall, composed of 3 feet of steel-reinforced concrete, didn't crumble. It detonated. A spray of dust, rebar, and concrete shrapnel exploded into the hallway, the shockwave blasting Nurse Ito off her feet and sending her sliding down the corridor. The alarms, which had been a low, insistent hum, now blared to life across the entire campus. Klaxons screamed, and piercing red lights began to strobe, painting the scene in flashes of blood and shadow. The Deku Hulk stepped through the gaping, jagged hole he had created. He saw the cowering form of the nurse 100 feet away, her terrified sobs reaching his ears. To his primal, raging mind, the sound was another irritant, another threat. He took a thunderous step towards her, the floor groaning under his weight. "Get away from him!" A blur of gray and black shot from a side corridor. Aizawa, his capture weapon lashing out, landed between the monster and the nurse. His eyes were blazing with their own crimson light, his hair floating, his quirk fully engaged. "Midoriya! Stand down!" he commanded, his voice echoing with authority. For a breathtaking instant, it seemed to work. The green lightning of One for All, which had begun to crackle around the creature's body like a chaotic aura, flickered and died. The air itself seemed to thin, the immense pressure of the stockpiled quirk vanishing under Aizawa's gaze. A momentary false hope. The Deku Hulk paused. He looked down at his own massive green hands, a flicker of something, not confusion, but perhaps mild curiosity, crossing his brutish features. The lightning was gone, but nothing else had changed. The green skin remained. The towering muscle mass remained. The raw, physics-defying strength remained. The incandescent rage in his glowing eyes remained. Aizawa's blood ran cold. In that moment, he understood the terrifying truth he had suspected. One for All was a quirk. He could erase it. But the Hulk was not. It was biological. It was a state of being, as fundamental to this new creature as the blood in its veins. He had turned off the afterburner, but the main engine was still roaring. The Deku Hulk looked up from his hands and locked eyes with Aizawa. It saw not a teacher, not a protector, but an obstacle. A threat. A small, defiant thing standing in its way. It let out a guttural snarl and swatted. The motion was casual, dismissive, almost lazy. The same way a human would swat a fly. The back of its hand, a slab of green muscle and bone, moved with deceptive speed. Aizawa, for all his agility and skill, had no time to dodge. The impact was a sickening, meaty thud. He was launched sideways like a ragdoll, his body cartwheeling through the air before smashing into the opposite wall with enough force to crack the concrete. He slumped to the floor, unconscious before he even landed, his capture weapon falling limply around him. The monster didn't even give him a second glance. Its attention was already back on the crying nurse. It took another step. Then, a new sound filled the hallway. The sound of a man coughing, a wet, ragged sound, followed by the unmistakable boom of a voice that had once given hope to the world. "That is enough!" The Deku Hulk paused, its head tilting. It turned, and its glowing green eyes fell upon the figure now blocking the corridor. All Might. He stood in his muscle form, steam billowing from his body, a phantom of his former glory. It was a painful transformation now, a desperate act that felt like grinding broken glass in his lungs, but he held it. He stood tall, his familiar smile replaced by a grim, determined line. His blue eyes, full of sorrow and resolve, met the monster's radioactive green. There was a flicker of recognition in the creature's gaze. A deep, primal memory stirred. It looked at the towering symbol of peace, and a low growl rumbled in its chest. All Might saw the flicker, and his heart ached. "Izuku, my boy," he said, his voice softer now, pleading. "I know you are in there. Fight it. Remember who you are. You are a hero." The creature's only response was to lower its head and charge. It was a terrifying sight, a 7-foot-tall mountain of green muscle and fury moving with the speed of a freight train. The floor cracked with every thunderous footfall. All Might braced himself. He couldn't punch. He couldn't use a smash. To strike this creature with his full remaining power would be to risk killing the boy inside. This was not a fight to win. It was a disaster to contain. He became a shield. The Deku Hulk's fist crashed into All Might's crossed arms. The impact was titanic. A shockwave of displaced air blasted down the corridor, shattering every remaining window and light fixture. The two figures, one a pillar of desperate hope, the other a force of pure rage, were locked in a stalemate. All Might's feet slid back, gouging deep trenches in the reinforced floor. His bones groaned under the strain. The raw, brutal, unending strength of the creature was staggering. It wasn't the trained, explosive power of a fighter. It was the relentless, crushing power of a tectonic plate. There was no technique, just an endless well of fury channeled into raw physical force. "Ragh!" The monster roared, pushing harder, its face inches from All Might's. Spit flecked with green flew from its lips. "Izuku, please!" All Might grunted, his muscles screaming, the edges of his vision starting to go dark. The time limit on his form was burning away at a terrifying rate. "Remember yourself! Remember your mother! Your friends! Uraraka! Ida!" He was hoping a name, a memory, could pierce the veil of rage. For a moment, at the mention of the names, the creature's assault seemed to lessen. Its brow furrowed, the glowing eyes flickered, as if trying to focus on a distant, forgotten thought. But then the pain of All Might's resistance, the sheer fact that he was being stopped, overrode everything else. The rage returned tenfold. With a deafening roar, the Deku Hulk broke the stalemate. It drove a knee into All Might's gut, a blow that would have instantly incapacitated any other hero. All Might doubled over, coughing up a spray of blood, his form flickering dangerously. The creature grabbed him by the shoulders, its massive hands easily encircling his biceps, and threw him. The symbol of peace, the hero of a generation, was hurled through the wall behind him as if he were a child's toy. He crashed through into what was once a records room, sending filing cabinets and shelves flying. The Deku Hulk, now unopposed, let out a triumphant, chest-thumping roar. It surveyed the destruction it had wrought, the broken walls, the unconscious heroes, the screaming alarms. It was a landscape of chaos, and it felt right. It was a physical manifestation of the storm inside its head. It lumbered out of the infirmary wing and into the main courtyard of UE's students, drawn by the alarms, screamed and fled at the sight of it. It ignored them, its attention drawn to the sky, to the open space. It was free of the confined, threatening corridors. From the wreckage of the records room, All Might staggered out, his muscle form flickering like a dying light bulb. He was bleeding, battered, but his spirit was not broken. He had to stop this. He had to save his boy, even if it cost him the last dregs of his power. "It's all right now, my boy," he said, forcing his voice to be calm, drawing the creature's attention back to him. "Why?" "Because I am here." He charged, not to attack, but to grapple. He slammed into the Deku Hulk's side, wrapping his powerful arms around its torso, trying to pin its arms to its sides in a full-body bear hug. It was the only thing he could do, hold on, and pray that someone, something, could get through to the boy inside. The creature thrashed in his grip, a wild animal caught in a trap. It slammed him against the side of a building, the impact shaking the entire structure. It stomped, it roared, it struggled, but All Might held on, his feet digging into the earth, his face a mask of pained determination. Izuku! He bellowed, his voice raw with desperation, his face pressed against the creature's back. Son! Fight it! Please come back to us! The struggle was immense. All Might could feel his own strength failing, the embers of One for All dying out. He was losing. The Deku Hulk roared in frustration, its massive body straining against the unbreakable hold. It was being contained. Restrained. It was being hurt. The pressure, the confinement, the name being screamed in its ear, it all coalesced into a single, overwhelming sensation. Pain. It threw its head back and let out a sound that was not just a roar. It was a word. A broken, twisted, agonizing word, forced through a throat that was not its own. The voice was a horrific fusion, Izuku's desperate, high-pitched tenor completely buried beneath a deep, monstrous bass, as if both were screaming the same word at once. All Might! All Might's heart seized. Had he reached him? Was that recognition? The creature thrashed again, a final, convulsive effort, and it forced out a second word. A word that chilled the legendary hero to his very soul. Hurt! The ambiguous, terrifying cry echoed across the ruined courtyard of Yuehai, a declaration of pain from a monster who wore a hero's face. All Might's grip faltered, his mind reeling from the horror of those two simple, garbled words. And in that moment of hesitation, he knew his time was up. The battle was lost. He hadn't saved his boy, he had only succeeded in becoming the target of his rage. The silence that followed the rampage was heavier and more profound than the chaos it had replaced. It was a silence filled with the dust of pulverized concrete, the faint, acrid smell of ozone, and the crushing weight of failure. The battle, if it could be called that, had ended not with a heroic victory, but with a desperate, last-ditch containment. It had taken everything they had. All Might's final, desperate hold had failed. The Deku Hulk, driven by the singular, primal thought that this titan holding him was the source of his pain, had broken free. But just as it had raised a fist to deliver a blow that would have surely extinguished the last embers of the symbol of peace, another hero had intervened. Cementos, his face a grim mask of concentration, had erupted from the ground, his quirk pushed to its absolute limit. Massive walls of concrete, thicker and more reinforced than anything he had ever created, rose from the courtyard, not to strike, but to envelop. They were soft at first, like wet clay, wrapping around the creature's limbs, its torso, its neck, swallowing it in a gray embrace. The Deku Hulk had thrashed, shattering layer after layer, but Cementos, fueled by adrenaline and the sight of a bleeding All Might, had kept creating, layering concrete upon concrete until the monster was encased in a solid, multi-ton sarcophagus. From there, it was a race against time. Midnight had arrived, tearing a hole in the concrete prison and flooding the small air pocket with her somnambulist quirk. For a tense, terrifying minute, nothing had happened. The monster's roars, muffled by the stone, had continued. They had feared its sheer rage would override the quirk's effects. But then, slowly, the roars had subsided. The frantic thrashing had ceased. The silence had fallen. The creature had been sedated. The boy had been subdued. When Izuku Midoriya awoke, it was to the cold kiss of polished metal against his cheek. He was lying on a simple cot in a room with no windows. The walls, floor, and ceiling were made of a seamless, dark gray alloy that seemed to drink the light from the single, flat panel glowing above him. The air was cool, sterile, and still. There was no hum of ventilation, no distant sound of life. There was only silence. He pushed himself up, his body aching with a deep, phantom soreness. He looked down at himself. He was wearing a simple, loose-fitting gray jumpsuit. His hands, he stared at his hands. They seemed broader, the knuckles thicker. He flexed his fingers. They felt powerful. Too powerful. He looked at his arms, his chest. The unnatural density he'd felt before he lost control was still there, a permanent alteration to his very frame. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of his mind. He scrambled off the cot, his bare feet making no sound on the metallic floor. He ran to the wall, slamming his hands against it. It was cold, unyielding, and utterly solid. He was in a box. A cage. Hello? His voice was hoarse, raspy. Is anyone there? Aizawa-sensei? All Might? His words were swallowed by the sound-dampening walls. The only answer was the thudding of his own heart, a frantic, rabbit-like tempo that felt dangerously loud in the oppressive silence. Fragments of memory, like shards of a shattered mirror, began to surface in his mind. Green light. A roaring sound that felt like it came from his own throat. The taste of blood and fury. The face of his mentor, All Might, twisted in pain and desperation. The sight of Aizawa-sensei, his teacher, being swatted aside like an insect. The terrified face of a nurse he didn't even know. He remembered the feeling. The unending boiling rage. The desire to smash, to break, to destroy everything that stood in his way. He remembered the power, a bottomless ocean of it, a force that made one for all feel like a gentle stream. It had felt good. The thought was a venomous snake coiling in his gut. In the moment, the release, the sheer act of letting the rage consume him, had felt liberating. The memory crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. The shame, the horror, the self-loathing. It was a tidal wave of guilt that threatened to drown him. He stumbled back from the wall, his legs giving out. He slid down to the floor, wrapping his arms around his knees, pulling himself into a tight ball as if he could physically compress the monstrosity he had become. He had hurt them. He had hurt his teachers, the people he admired most in the world. He had terrified his friends. The power he had always dreamed of, the strength to save everyone, had twisted into a curse that only knew how to destroy. He wasn't a hero. He was a monster. A villain in a hero's body. Tears welled in his eyes, hot and shameful. He buried his face in his knees, his shoulders shaking with silent, racking sobs. He was so terrified of his own emotions, of what another spike of adrenaline or fear might do, that he tried to suppress the crying. He bit down on his lip, drawing blood, focusing on the sharp, physical pain to distract from the emotional agony. He couldn't risk it. He couldn't risk letting the monster out again. A soft hiss, barely audible, broke the silence. A section of the wall opposite him retracted, revealing not a door, but a thick sheet of transparent, bulletproof material. Beyond it, in a stark white observation room, stood three figures he both longed for and dreaded to see. Principal Nisa stood on a reinforced stool, his small form radiating a solemn gravity. Beside him, Aizawa-sensei, his arm now in a heavy-duty cast and sling, his face pale and bruised, watched him with an unreadable, weary expression. And next to him, looking more gaunt and fragile than Izuku had ever seen him, was Toshinori Yagi. All Might. His mentor looked as if he had aged 10 years in a single day, the guilt and sorrow carved into the lines of his face. Izuku flinched, curling into himself even tighter, unable to meet their gazes. He felt like a bug under a microscope, a specimen to be studied. It was Nisa who spoke first, his voice amplified by a small speaker set into the wall. Midoriya. It is good to see you conscious and lucid. The words were calm, measured, but they offered no comfort. Izuku didn't respond. He just kept his face hidden, wishing the floor would swallow him whole. We need to talk about what happened. Aizawa's voice cut in, sharp and direct, leaving no room for pleasantries. We need to understand the nature of this new power you possess. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut. I heard you, he whispered, his voice cracking. I heard All Might. Your body underwent a significant, uncontrolled transformation triggered by a sudden auditory stimulus, Nisa stated, his tone analytical. The result was a temporary loss of higher cognitive function, replaced by a state of primal aggression. The entity you become does not seem to be inherently malicious, but rather, defensively violent. It perceives threats and obstacles and removes them with extreme prejudice. Entity. The word was so cold, so clinical. It was a label for a thing, not a person. It solidified the terrifying truth in Izuku's mind. There was another being living inside him now. The energy that caused this, we believe it was a fusion. Toshinori finally spoke, his voice heavy with a profound, personal grief. The raw power of one for all, my power, it merged with something else, something alien. Something from that rift. He looked down, unable to continue, the weight of his perceived failure silencing him. Izuku finally looked up, his tear-streaked face a mask of misery. What happens now? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Am I being expelled? Expulsion seemed like a mercy. It would get him away from everyone, where he couldn't hurt them anymore. Aizawa let out a short, humorless huff. Expulsion is for problem students, Midoriya. You have transcended that category. You are now a national security concern. He gestured around at the seamless gray room. This is a level 5 containment cell. It was designed by David Shield after the fall of All for One, theoretically intended to hold a high-end Nomu or a captured A-rank villain indefinitely. It's located in a sub-basement 500 feet beneath UA. Until we can determine if you can control this transformation, you cannot return to the dorms. You cannot return to class. You are a danger to yourself and to everyone around you. Every word was a hammer blow, cracking the foundations of Izuku's world. His dream, the very core of his being, was to be a pro-hero, to stand alongside his friends at UA. And now, he was a prisoner in its deepest, darkest dungeon, locked away like the very villains he had sworn to fight. The irony was so cruel, so absolute, that a hysterical bubble of laughter threatened to escape his throat. He choked it back, the sound turning into another sob. This is for your own safety, young Midoriya, Toshinori said, his voice pleading. And for everyone else's. We are not giving up on you. We are trying to understand this, to help you. But Izuku wasn't listening. He was lost in the cold, hard reality of his cage. The power he had been given to be a hero had made him a prisoner. The rage inside him, the memory of its destructive catharsis, terrified him more than any villain ever could. The days that followed blurred into a monotonous cycle of silence and observation. He was given food through a small, automated slot in the wall. He was allowed a small, Spartan bathroom that was sealed off behind another seamless panel. He spent most of his time sitting on the cot, or pacing the small, 10x10 space, a caged tiger terrified of its own stripes. He tried to meditate, to reach the vestiges of One for All. He closed his eyes and concentrated, searching for that familiar, comforting inner sanctuary. But when he reached inward, he found only the memory of the storm. The psychic nexus was still there, but it was scarred, tainted. The calm was gone, replaced by a lingering, low-level static of green energy, a constant hum of suppressed rage. He could feel the vestiges, distant and faint, like voices on the other side of a thick wall, but he couldn't reach them. And he could feel it. The other one. The Hulk. It was sleeping, but it was there, a coiled serpent of fury in the deepest part of his soul, waiting for the slightest provocation to strike. Any strong emotion was a risk. When he felt a surge of frustration at his confinement, he felt a flicker of heat in his blood, and he saw his reflection in the polished wall shimmer with a faint green tint. He immediately suppressed it, forcing his mind to go blank, his heart to slow. When a wave of despair washed over him, a deep, sorrowful ache, he felt the same internal pressure build. He learned to fear his own heart. He built walls around his emotions, becoming a hollow shell of himself, a quiet, compliant prisoner. It was the only way to keep the monster caged. After the third day of this self-imposed emotional lockdown, the wall hissed open again. This time, it was just Aizawa. He told him he had a visitor. A bubble of terrified hope burst in Izuku's chest. A friend? It was a connection to the world he had lost, a world of sunshine, laughter, and camaraderie. But the hope was immediately followed by a wave of pure terror. What if he lost control? What if he scared them? He wanted to say no. He wanted to scream at Aizawa to keep them away, to protect them from him. But a selfish, desperate part of him, the part that was still a lonely 17-year-old boy, yearned for a familiar face. He nodded, a single, jerky motion. Aizawa gave a curt nod in return and stepped aside. Through the transparent wall, Ochako Uraraka stepped into the observation room. Her presence was like a ray of sunshine piercing the gloom of his prison. She wore her school uniform, not her hero costume, and she was clutching a small, brightly wrapped bento box in her hands. Her face was a mixture of worry, apprehension, and a forced, brave smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Hey, Deku," she said, her voice slightly muffled by the barrier. Ida and I were worried. We convinced Aizawa-sensei to let me bring you this. It's katsudon. Your favorite. She held up the bento box to the glass. Katsudon. The food of champions. The meal his mother always made him to celebrate. The simple, kind gesture was so overwhelming, so at odds with the monstrous reality of his situation, that it shattered the fragile walls he had built around his emotions. A choked sob escaped his lips. Uraraka-san. It's okay, Deku, she said quickly, her own voice wavering. Everything's going to be okay. We're all here for you. We're going to figure this out. You're the strongest person I know. You can beat this. Her faith in him was a physical blow. He didn't deserve it. He was a fraud, a monster hiding in the shell of her friend. You shouldn't be here, he stammered, shaking his head. It's not safe. I'm not safe. Don't say that, she insisted, her knuckles white where she gripped the bento. You're a hero. You saved Hatsum. You saved all of us. This is just an accident. It's like a quirk gone haywire. You can get it under control. I know you can. Her fierce loyalty, her unwavering belief in him, it was too much. The frustration at his own weakness, the despair of his situation, the sheer emotional overload, it was a potent cocktail. He could feel the pressure building inside him, the low hum of green static growing louder in his mind. He stood up, pacing back and forth, running a hand through his hair. You don't understand. It's not a quirk. It's something else. Something angry. I can't control it. His voice was rising, growing more frantic. I hurt people, Uraraka-san. I could have killed Aizawa-sensei. I could have killed All Might. I could hurt you. He slammed his fist against the unyielding wall of his cell, not with his full, monstrous strength, but with the desperate, frustrated force of a helpless teenager. The impact was loud in the silent room, and as he did, his eyes flashed. For just a single, terrifying instant, the gentle green of his irises was consumed by that brilliant, radioactive glow. The change was so fast it was almost subliminal, a phantom flash of emerald fire, but Uraraka saw it. Her reaction was involuntary, a primal, instinctual response coded into human DNA from millennia of avoiding predators. Her breath hitched. Her eyes widened, and she took a small, almost imperceptible step back from the glass. She flinched. The motion was tiny. A half-step, a slight recoil. But to Izuku, it was a chasm opening between them. It was a physical manifestation of his greatest fear. He had scared her. The kindest, bravest person he knew was afraid of him. The fire of his frustration was instantly extinguished, replaced by a cold, hollowing dread that was somehow even worse. The flash in his eyes vanished, leaving them wide and wounded. He stared at her, at the small space she had put between them, and the look of absolute devastation on his face was heart-wrenching. Uraraka realized what she had done immediately. The look of horror on her face shifted from fear of him to horror at herself. Deku, I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Please leave, he whispered, his voice flat and dead. He turned away from her, from the glass, and walked back to his cot, sitting down with his back to her. He couldn't bear to see the fear in her eyes again. Deku, wait, please, he said, his voice stronger now, but colder, laced with a finality that brooked no argument. For your own safety. Just go. In the observation room, Uraraka stood frozen, the bento box feeling impossibly heavy in her hands. Tears streamed down her face, tears of sorrow for her friend and of shame for her own moment of weakness. Aizawa placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. That's enough for today, Uraraka, he said softly. She could only nod, allowing him to guide her out of the room, her gaze fixed on the back of the boy who was now truly and utterly alone, a prisoner not just of the cell, but of his own terrifying power, and the fear it inspired in those he loved most. As the door to the observation room hissed shut, leaving him once again in silence, Izuku Midoriya curled up on his cot, the last vestiges of his hope crumbling to dust. He had pushed away the only person who had tried to reach him. It was better this way, he told himself. It was safer. If he was to be a monster, he would be a monster alone. He closed his eyes, welcoming the cold, empty darkness. It was the only place he couldn't hurt anyone. The silence in sub-basement level 5 became a living entity, a constant companion for its sole occupant. Days bled into one another, marked only by the automated hum of the food slot and the shift changes of the silent guards Izuku could sometimes feel, but never see, beyond his seamless prison. After the disastrous visit with Uraraka, he had refused all others. The request had been delivered to Aizawa through the intercom with a chilling, dead-eyed calm that had worried the veteran hero more than any outburst could have. Izuku had severed his last tie to the sunlit world, retreating into the cold, gray sanctuary of his cage. His life became a routine of monastic discipline born of pure terror. He ate the tasteless nutritional paste he was given. He performed basic exercises, push-ups, sit-ups, squats, to maintain some semblance of normalcy, but he never pushed himself, never allowed his heart rate to climb too high. The rest of the time, he sat. He sat on his cot for hours on end, staring at the gray wall, his mind a carefully curated wasteland. He ruthlessly suppressed every spike of emotion. A flicker of anger at his confinement was immediately smothered by a wave of forced apathy. A pang of loneliness for his friends was buried under a mountain of logical reasoning about their safety. He was becoming a master of emotional self-flagellation, snuffing out every spark of his own humanity for fear it would ignite the monster. But the monster was not a separate entity to be ignored. It was a part of him now, woven into his biology, its consciousness a dark undercurrent in his own. In the crushing silence of the cell, with no external stimuli to distract him, Izuku began to hear it. It wasn't a voice, not in the traditional sense. It was a feeling, a pressure at the back of his skull, a low, subsonic hum that vibrated in his bones. It was the psychic static left over from the storm, a constant, low-level broadcast of the Hulk's sleeping mind. During the day, when he was awake and vigilant, he could mostly ignore it, but in the twilight hours, as he drifted towards a restless, dreamless sleep, the whispers grew louder. Tired, the impression would bleed into his consciousness, a wave of profound, bone-deep weariness that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. It was the weariness of a being that had been born into a state of constant, agonizing rage. Hurt. This one was sharper, a phantom pain that echoed the containment by Cementas and the desperate, unbreakable grip of All Might. It was the memory of being restrained, caged, stopped. To the Hulk, being stopped was a form of injury, an existential threat to its purpose. Alone, this whisper was the most insidious. It was a cold, desolate feeling, the loneliness of a singularity, a creature utterly unique and utterly misunderstood. Izuku tried to tell himself it was his own loneliness, but the texture of it was different. It was a feral, wild loneliness, not the sad, human ache he knew. He fought against it, building his mental walls higher, reinforcing them with logic and fear. He couldn't afford to listen. To listen was to acknowledge, and to acknowledge was to invite it closer. Meanwhile, in the sunlit world above, the investigation was proceeding with a frantic, desperate intensity. The unforeseen simulation Joint 2.0 was a quarantine disaster zone, crawling with forensic specialists and scientists. The crater at the center of the plaza was the focal point of their efforts. Mei Hatsum, grounded from all hero-related exercises indefinitely, had channeled her manic energy into a singular, obsessive purpose. She was working alongside Power Loader and a team of UA's top scientific minds, her usual glee replaced by a grim, focused determination. She felt the crushing weight of responsibility. Midoriya had become that, while saving her. The guilt was a powerful motivator. The residual energy is a fascinating nightmare, Sensei. She exclaimed, her voice tinny over the comms linked to the primary lab where Power Loader was collating data. She was standing at the edge of the crater in a full hazmat suit, a complex-looking scanner of her own design pointed at the glassy, fused Earth. My babies are picking up two distinct signatures in a quantum entanglement state. It's beautiful. And terrifying. One is clearly the bioenergy profile of Midoriya's quirk, massive stockpiles of kinetic and potential energy, off the charts but still within a recognizable framework. And the other, Hatsum? Power Loader's voice was gravelly with fatigue. The other is the weird sister, she said, tapping furiously at her wrist-mounted display. It's not quirk energy. It has the properties of a specific, high-frequency electromagnetic radiation, extremely high-energy photons. My spectroanalyzer is flagging it as a gamma-ray variant, but one with a biological component. It's like the radiation itself is alive. It's bonded to his DNA on a subcellular level. Trying to separate them now would be like trying to take the salt out of the ocean. This confirmed what Recovery Girl had suspected. It wasn't an energy field affecting Izuku. It was a fundamental change to his biology. He didn't have a new power. He was a new power. The report was sent to the principal's office, where Nizu was conducting a video conference that stretched across the globe. On one of the screens was the weary, intelligent face of David Shield, broadcasting from his laboratory on an island. Gamma radiation with a biological component, David repeated, stroking his chin, his expression deeply troubled. And a psychic component of pure rage, you said? Principal Nizu Toshinori, this is deeply disturbing. Toshinori Yagi sat in a chair beside Nizu's desk, looking like a ghost haunting a meeting of the living. He had barely spoken. Have you encountered anything like this before, David-san? Nizu asked, his paws steepled before him. David Shield hesitated. He looked off-screen for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. The official records of the Battle of New York and the Sokovia Offensive were heavily classified. The existence of the Avengers was public knowledge, but the specific powers and origins of its members were closely guarded secrets, especially the more volatile ones. There are theories, David said carefully, choosing his words with diplomatic precision. Unconfirmed reports from an incident in America several years ago, a research project into bioenhancement and radiation resistance, funded by the military. It went catastrophically wrong. The lead scientist, Dr. Bruce Banner, was exposed to a massive dose of gamma radiation. Toshinori's head snapped up. His sunken eyes locked onto David's face on the screen. What happened to him? He survived, David said, his voice low. But he was changed. The reports, the rumors, they speak of a creature. A monster of unstoppable strength and uncontrollable rage, triggered by stress or anger. They called it the Hulk. The name hung in the air of Nizu's office, heavy and ominous. The Hulk. It was a name that perfectly encapsulated the roaring, single-minded consciousness Nana Shimura had described from the Vestige's fragmented reports. So you are suggesting, Nizu said, his voice dangerously soft, that the entity which attacked New York, the one the American government has spent a decade trying to cover up and control, has somehow fused with one of my students? The parallels are too significant to ignore, David admitted. A brilliant mind, a gamma accident, a rage-fueled transformation. The rift your villain created must have opened a gateway not just to another place, but to another reality. And at the worst possible moment, it created a conduit. Young Midoriya didn't just get hit by a wave of energy. He was psychically and biologically fused with the essence of this Hulk. Toshinori felt a cold dread wash over him. It wasn't just a random alien power. It was the power of another man's curse. Another person, a Dr. Banner, was trapped in the same nightmare, and now Izuku was too. He had given his successor a sacred torch, only for it to be doused in another man's hellfire. Is there a cure? Toshinori asked, his voice a desperate plea. David Shield's expression was full of pity. Toshinori, they've had the world's best minds working on Dr. Banner for years. As far as anyone knows, the condition is permanent. The only path forward they've found isn't a cure. It's management. Integration. Integration. The word echoed Nizu's earlier hypothesis. To not fight the monster, but to accept it. A terrifying prospect, but it was the only glimmer of hope they had. Deep in the psychic realm of One for All, the storm had passed, but the landscape was forever changed. The sky was a permanent, sickly bruise of green and purple. The ground was cracked, and a low, green fog, the residue of the Hulk's rage, clung to everything. The Vestiges were huddled together, their forms dimmer, their sanctuary violated. They were trying to regroup, to understand the new, terrible dynamic of their world. The boy is building walls, Heikid Shinomori, the fourth user, observed. His voice was a quiet rustle, like dry leaves. He is suppressing his emotions. It is starving the beast, but it is also starving himself. He is cutting himself off from us. It is a logical, if tragic, response, Daigoro Banjo countered, his usual boisterous energy gone, replaced by a grim pragmatism. Every time he feels, the green one stirs, he is trying to protect the outside world by turning his own mind into a prison. Yoichi Shigaraki, the first, stood looking out at the green fog, his expression one of deep concentration. As the origin point of One for All, his connection to the core was the strongest. He could feel the intricate, horrifying fusion more clearly than any of the others. It is not a separate beast, he said, his voice cutting through the others' murmurs. That is the mistake the boy is making. He thinks it is an invader to be cast out. But it is not. It has been woven into the very fabric of his being, and into the core of One for All itself. He held up a hand, and a faint, shimmering light, the essence of the quirk, appeared in his palm. It was no longer a pure, brilliant white. It was now shot through with flickering, toxic green veins. It is a part of us now, Yoichi continued. And it is not purely malicious. I can feel its core motivation. It is born of trauma, the boy's trauma from the incident, fused with the original host's own deep-seated pain. Its rage is a shield. A crude, destructive, terrifying shield, but a shield nonetheless. Nana Shimura, her heart aching for the boy who felt like her own grandson, floated closer to Yoichi. A shield for what? For Izuku, Yoichi answered, his gaze intense. Think of the boy's own history. A lifetime of being powerless, of being told he was weak and inadequate. A deep, desperate, buried desire to be strong enough to protect everyone, born from his own feelings of helplessness. This Hulk is the ultimate, twisted manifestation of that desire. It feels Izuku's pain, his fear, his stress, and its only solution, its only programming, is to emerge and smash the source of that pain. He looked at Nana, his eyes conveying the terrible truth. It wants to protect Izuku. But its definition of protection is absolute destruction. Its psychic roar, the one that deafened us, it is a simple, desperate plea, leave Deku alone. A stunned silence fell over the vestiges. They had seen the Hulk as a mindless monster, a force of pure destruction. But Yoichi's words painted a different picture. It was a guard dog, a rabid, terrifyingly powerful, out-of-control guard dog, but its loyalty was to their host. Then suppression is the wrong path, Nana said, a new resolve hardening her voice. If he continues to treat it like a cage, the beast will only grow more desperate to break free. If he pushes it away, it will only see him, his own emotions, as another threat to be neutralized. He cannot cast it out. She looked at the other vestiges, her eyes burning with a fierce, protective light. We cannot reach him directly. His walls are too high. But we are the voices of his power. We are the chorus to his song. We must find a way to break through the static. We cannot speak to him in words, not yet. So we will speak to him in feelings. We will show him that this rage is not an enemy to be feared, but a tool to be understood. The vestiges nodded in unison. Their purpose, once to simply guide the next wielder of One for All, had fundamentally changed. Now they had to become therapists, spiritual guides, and monster tamers, all from within the confines of a traumatized boy's soul. They had to teach their host how to listen to the whispers in the green static, not with fear, but with empathy. It was a near impossible task, but it was the only path back to the light.